They called it the concrete ghost, an abandoned hospital I was gutting for scrap. But it was hiding a real ghost one that had been locked away for 30 years and was still breathing. They called it the concrete ghost, the old district hospital on the edge of town. A brutalist monstrosity left over from an era that preferred function over form. It had been shuttered for nearly 30 years. Now, the city had finally sold the land to developers, and my job was simple. Get in. Salvage any valuable scrap metal before the demolition crews turned the whole thing into a pile of dust and memories. I run a small mechanics garage, but times are tough, and a side gig gutting a dead building for copper pipes and steel beams was a welcome payday. The place had a smell, not just of damp and decay, but of something else. Antiseptic clinging to the air like a phantom, mixed with the faint, metallic tang of old blood that had seeped into the cracked linoleum floors. I tried not to think about it. I just focused on the rhythmic clang of my crowbar and the squeal of rusted metal giving way. Most days were the same. Pipes, radiators, window frames. But on the third day, in what must have been the head physician's office, I found it. It was hidden behind a massive steel filing cabinet that took me the better part of an hour to wrestle away from the wall. The cabinet was empty, looted years ago, but the space it left behind revealed a dark square set into the concrete floor. A safe. Not a modern one with a digital keypad, but a relic. It was squat, heavy, and painted a faded, institutional green, the paint chipped and flaking to reveal the dark iron beneath. In the center of the thick door was a small embossed plate, a hammer and sickle, encircled by a wreath of wheat. Soviet-made, built to last longer than the ideology it represented. My heart gave a little kick. This was it. This was the jackpot every scavenger dreams of. Old safes like this could hold anything. Forgotten currency, historical documents, jewelry stashed away, and forgotten when the Union fell. The dial was stiff, frozen with decades of disuse. There was no key, of course. For a moment, I considered leaving it. The thing had to weigh 1/4 of a ton, and it was bolted to the floor. But the thought of what might be inside, it was a hook I couldn't shake. It took me the rest of the day and a car jack to break the bolts, and another 2 hours with a heavy-duty dolly to wrestle it out of the hospital and onto the flatbed of my truck. My back screamed in protest, but my mind was buzzing. Back in my garage, the safe sat in the middle of the floor like a captured beast. The air, usually thick with the smell of motor oil and hot metal, now seemed charged with the scent of the hospital's dust. For 2 days, I tried to open it the right way. I watched videos, listened with a stethoscope pressed to the cold steel, trying to hear the delicate click of the tumblers. Nothing. The mechanism was either rusted solid or just too complex for an amateur. My patience, already thin, finally snapped. On the third night, fueled by cheap coffee and pure frustration, I decided to stop playing safecracker and start being a mechanic. I pulled out my angle grinder. The shriek of the cutting disc against the hardened steel was deafening, filling the garage with a shower of incandescent orange sparks. It felt like a violation, like carving up a piece of history. I worked for hours, sweat stinging my eyes, the high-pitched scream of the grinder the only sound in the dead of night. I cut through the hinges first, a slow, brutal process that ate 2 of my best cutting discs. The door, freed from its ancient bonds, still wouldn't budge. The locking bolts were holding it fast. So I started on the lock itself, grinding a crude hole right through the center of the dial. Metal groaned and warped under the intense heat. Finally, with a deafening crack, something deep inside the mechanism shattered. The grinding noise changed, and with a final push from my crowbar, the heavy iron door groaned open. I killed the grinder, the sudden silence making my ears ring. A cloud of acrid smoke and metal dust billowed out of the opening. I coughed, waving it away, my flashlight beam cutting through the haze. My heart pounded in my chest, a frantic drum against my ribs. I peered inside, expecting... well, I don't know what I was expecting. Stacks of rubles? Gold? The safe was almost completely empty. My stomach dropped. All that work. All that effort. For nothing. The bottom was lined with a piece of felt that had mostly rotted away. There was a single, tarnished medal, a hero of Socialist Labor Award, by the looks of it, and a couple of dried-up fountain pens. That was it. I slumped against my workbench, the exhaustion hitting me like a physical blow. I felt like an idiot. But then my flashlight beam caught something else, tucked into a small leather sleeve on the inside of the door, something I hadn't noticed at first. It was a single envelope. It wasn't crisp and white, but thick cream-colored paper that had yellowed to the color of old ivory. It was sealed on the back with a blob of dark red wax, the insignia pressed into it too faded to make out. And on the front, written in a steady, elegant Cyrillic script that was a world away from the blocky, official text of the era, was a name. It wasn't a government department. It wasn't the name of the hospital director. It was the name of a person. A woman. Elizaveta Orlova. A cold dread mixed with an electrifying curiosity washed over me. This wasn't treasure. This was personal. Something so important, so private, that a doctor had locked it away in a Soviet-era safe, bolted to the floor of a concrete hospital. It had sat there in the dark for over 30 years, waiting. My hands trembled slightly as I picked it up. The paper was brittle, fragile. It felt wrong to hold it, like I was intruding on a secret that wasn't mine to know. I should have thrown it away, left the ghost in its tomb. But I couldn't. I had to know. Sitting there, in the greasy, familiar comfort of my own garage, under the buzzing fluorescent lights, I turned the envelope over in my hands. The wax seal, brittle with age, crumbled under my thumb with a sound like a breaking promise. Inside, there were 3 things. My fingers, smudged with grease and metal dust, felt clumsy and crude as I drew them out. The first was a photograph, a small black-and-white portrait on thick card-like paper. It was a woman, maybe in her mid-20s. Elizaveta. She wasn't smiling. Not exactly, but there was a hint of a smile at the corners of her mouth. She had dark, intense eyes that seemed to look right through the lens, right through the 30 years of darkness, and straight at me. She wore what looked like a nurse's uniform, simple and stark, with her hair pinned up neatly. There was a strange vitality to her, even in the faded monochrome image. She looked strong, healthy, and more alive than anyone I'd ever seen in a photograph. The second item was a single, folded sheet of official-looking paper. It was a medical report of some kind, filled with dense, typewritten text and handwritten notes in the same elegant script as the envelope. The letterhead read, District Hospital No. 4, Special Projects Division. I'm a mechanic. I understand schematics and engine specifications, but this was a foreign language. Words jumped out at me, clinical and sterile, yet deeply unsettling. Subject 7. Anomalous cellular regeneration. Cognitive and physiological responses exceeding all predicted parameters. There were charts with steep, upward climbing lines, and a final, handwritten note at the bottom, heavily underlined. Further observation must be conducted under strictest quarantine protocols. Stage 3 progression is unknown. Recommend immediate transfer to Facility 12. The final thing was the letter. It was several pages long, handwritten on thin, almost translucent paper. It wasn't addressed to Elizaveta, but it was clearly about her. It began without a salutation, as if it were a journal entry, a confession spilled onto the page in a moment of crisis. October 14th, 1988, it started. They want to take her. The men from the ministry. They came today, not in lab coats, but in gray suits that didn't fit them properly. They don't see her as I do. They don't see Elizaveta, the kind nurse who volunteered, who believed in a better future through science. They see a result, a weapon, a resource to be exploited. They call her Subject 7, but I still see the girl who brought me tea when I worked late, who calmed the crying children in the West Wing. My hands shook as I read on. The writer who signed his name at the end as Dr. Ivan Volkov was clearly the head physician. He wrote not of a patient, but of an experiment, a secret project sanctioned by the state to push the boundaries of human endurance and recovery. Elizaveta had been a volunteer. The initial results were miraculous. Wounds that healed in minutes. a resilience to disease that defied all medical science. But it didn't stop. The regeneration became aggressive. Dr. Volkov wrote of her needing less sleep, of her senses becoming unnaturally acute. He wrote of a change in her eyes, a cold, predatory intelligence that was beginning to eclipse the warm woman he knew. It is not healing, he wrote, his script growing more frantic towards the end. It is replacement. Something new is being built from the template of the old. I have created something I can no longer control, and they want to let it loose on the world. I cannot allow that. I have told them the project was a failure, that Subject 7 expired from unforeseen complications. I have falsified every document, burned the research notes. All that remains is this summary, her photograph, and my final report, locked away where no one will ever find them. As for Elizaveta, I will do what I must. I will tell her we are going somewhere safe, a place where they can't find her. It is the only way to protect her, and the only way to protect everyone else from her. I sat back, the pages trembling in my hand. The garage, my sanctuary of steel and oil, suddenly felt like a tomb. This wasn't a love letter or a hidden fortune. It was the final testament of a terrified man, a secret he took with him to the grave, documenting the birth of... What? A monster? A miracle? I looked at the photograph of Elizaveta. Her dark, knowing eyes seemed to hold the answer. My first instinct was to burn it all, destroy the envelope and its contents and pretend I never found the safe. But I couldn't. I was caught. I spent the next hour online, my greasy fingers tapping on the keyboard. A search for Elizaveta Orlova was useless. The name was too common. A search for Dr. Ivan Volkov, District Hospital No. 4, was more fruitful, but only slightly. I found a small, archived notice from a local 1989 newspaper. It mentioned his distinguished career and his sudden retirement due to a debilitating illness. It was a clean, neat story. Too neat. There was no mention of a Special Projects Division or a Facility 12. It was a dead end. I felt a creeping paranoia settle over me. This was a 30-year-old secret. Everyone involved was probably long dead. And yet, holding these papers felt dangerous. I carefully placed the photo, the report, and the letter back into the old ivory envelope. I didn't want it in my apartment. I slid it back into its little leather sleeve on the inside of the safe door and swung the brutalized iron door shut. It didn't lock, of course, but closing it felt symbolic, like putting a lid on a coffin. Exhaustion finally hit me. I switched off the garage lights and stepped out into the cool night air to lock up. The street was quiet, bathed in the sickly orange glow of the streetlights. I pulled the heavy corrugated door down with a deafening clang that echoed in the silence, then turned towards the small staircase that led to my apartment. That's when I saw it. At the far end of the block, shrouded in shadow just beyond the reach of the last streetlight. A figure. It was just standing there, perfectly still. Too far to see a face or even tell if it was a man or a woman, just a dark silhouette against the peeling paint of a derelict building. A prickle of cold sweat ran down my back. I told myself it was nothing. Someone waiting for a taxi. A drunk who'd lost their way home. But they were unnaturally still. Watching. I fumbled with the keys to my own door, my heart starting to hammer against my ribs. I risked another glance. The space under the streetlight was empty. The figure was gone. I let out a breath I didn't realize I'd been holding, laughing at my own jumpiness. I was letting the ghost story from the safe get to me. But as I stepped inside and locked my door, the feeling didn't go away. The feeling of being watched. And a terrifying new thought crept into my mind, cold and sharp as a scalpel. What if Elizaveta's illness wasn't the kind you die from? Sleep didn't come easy that night. Every creak of the old building, every distant siren, had me sitting bolt upright in bed, my ears straining against the silence. The image of the figure at the end of the street was burned into my mind. I kept telling myself it was a coincidence, my imagination running wild after unearthing a 30-year-old horror story. But the feeling of being watched lingered, a physical weight on my chest. When I finally drifted into a restless sleep, my dreams were filled with the concrete hallways of the hospital and the piercing, dark eyes of Elizaveta Orlova staring at me from every shadow. The next morning I tried to force a sense of normalcy. I opened the garage, the smell of coffee overpowering the scent of stale fear from the night before. But the safe was still there, a squat green monument to my obsession. I couldn't leave it. The story was incomplete, a hook sunk deep in my gut. I had to know what Facility 12 was. I spent the morning running diagnostics on a customer's sputtering engine, but my mind was elsewhere. I kept glancing at the safe, half expecting the heavy door to swing open on its own. During my lunch break, I took a different approach. Instead of searching for people, I started searching for places. Facility 12 and Special Projects Division yielded nothing connected to my region. It was all a dead end. On a whim, I tried a broader search, combining terms like Soviet secret medical research, quarantine zone, and the name of our region. I scrolled through pages of conspiracy theories and crackpot websites. And then I found it. It wasn't a direct hit, but a comment on an obscure urban exploration forum. A user was talking about an old, abandoned sanatorium deep in the forests about 100 kilometers north of my city. They called it the Asylum of the Pines. The post mentioned strange rumors from the locals, stories of military fences that went up overnight in the late 80s, of hushed-up experiments, and of the whole place being abruptly abandoned. And then, at the end of the post, was the line that made my blood run cold. Some of the old-timers from the nearby village still call it by its project number, Facility 12. My hands were clammy. This was it. Facility 12 was real. It wasn't just a scribble on a dead doctor's note. It was a physical place. A place where Dr. Volkov had intended to take Elizaveta. The sanatorium. A place for healing. It was the perfect, tragic irony. He was taking her to a prison designed to look like a sanctuary. The question was, did he succeed? Did he get her there? Or did the men in the ill-fitting grey suits get to him first? I had to go. The idea was insane. Driving out into the middle of nowhere to find a derelict secret Soviet lab based on a single forum comment was the kind of thing that happened in cheap horror movies. But I couldn't shake the feeling that the answers were there. More than that, I felt a strange sense of responsibility. Volkov had tried to bury this secret to protect people. By opening that safe, I had dug it up. Maybe it was up to me to finish the job, to understand what he had unleashed and make sure it stayed buried. I closed the garage early, leaving a note for my customers on the door. I threw a heavy-duty flashlight, a crowbar, and a first aid kit into a backpack. I hesitated for a moment, then went back to the safe. I carefully took out the envelope, handling it like an ancient relic. I couldn't leave it behind. If something happened to me, I didn't want anyone else finding it. I tucked it into the inner pocket of my jacket, the brittle paper a strange comfort against my chest. The drive took nearly 2 hours, the city's familiar grid giving way to winding country roads and then to little more than a dirt track. The forest grew dense and dark around me, the tall pines blocking out the late afternoon sun. My phone lost its signal a long time ago. I was completely alone. I followed the coordinates from the forum post, my truck's suspension groaning in protest as I navigated the rutted, overgrown path. And then the trees opened up, and I saw it. A rusted chain-link fence, topped with coils of barbed wire, stretched as far as I could see in either direction. A massive iron gate, chained and padlocked, blocked the entrance. Behind it, a long winding driveway disappeared into the trees. This was no sanatorium. This was a prison. I pulled the truck over, concealing it as best I could behind a thicket of overgrown bushes. The silence here was different. It wasn't the absence of city noise. It was a heavy, watchful silence. The air was cold, tasting of pine and damp earth. I found a section of the fence where a large pine had fallen years ago, crushing the top and creating a gap. I squeezed through, the barbs snagging on my jacket. I was in. I followed the cracked asphalt of the old driveway, my boots crunching on fallen leaves and broken twigs. After a 10-minute walk, the main building came into view. It was a sprawling 3-story structure, built in the imposing Stalinist style, but with wide verandas and large windows that spoke of its original purpose as a place of rest and recovery. Now, the windows were shattered, and the facade was stained with decades of grime and creeping ivy. I approached the main entrance. The heavy wooden doors were barred from the outside with a thick iron beam. Not just locked, barricaded. Someone wanted to keep people out, or maybe they wanted to keep something in. I circled the building, my heart thudding a nervous rhythm against my ribs. I found a ground floor window that had been smashed open. It looked into what might have been a common room. The floor was littered with debris, overturned furniture, and drifts of dead leaves. I hoisted myself up and through the jagged opening, landing with a soft thud inside. The smell was the first thing that hit me. It was the same smell as the hospital, but magnified 100 times. The chemical scent of antiseptic fused with the organic stench of rot and decay. My flashlight beam cut a nervous path through the gloom. The place had been ransacked. Papers were scattered everywhere, medical equipment was smashed, and furniture was splintered. But it wasn't the work of vandals. It looked desperate, frantic, like people had left in a blind panic. I moved deeper into the building, my footsteps echoing in the vast empty halls. I found patient rooms, the beds stripped bare, the walls stained. I found a laboratory, vials and beakers shattered on the floor, their unknown contents long since evaporated. The whole place felt like a crime scene where the victims, the culprits, and the motive had all vanished without a trace. I was looking for an administration office, a records room, anything that could tell me what happened here. I found a door with a faded plaque that read, Chief of Medicine. It was locked. I used the crowbar, and the old wood splintered easily. Inside, it was the same story of chaos. A heavy desk was overturned, and filing cabinets had been ripped open, their contents strewn across the floor. My light swept across the mess, and then it stopped. On the far wall, something was scratched into the plaster. It wasn't graffiti. The marks were deep, gouged into the wall as if by an animal's claws or a piece of sharp metal. It was a single word, repeated over and over, dozens of times, in messy, desperate Cyrillic script. Orlova, Orlova, Orlova. A shiver traced its way down my spine. This was her room, or at least a room dedicated to her. I moved closer, my light playing over the frantic scratches, and beneath the final, deeply carved name was a date, October 23rd, 1988, 9 days after Dr. Volkov wrote his letter. He had made it here. He had brought her here. My flashlight beam drifted down from the wall, across the floor, and to the corner of the room, to a spot partially hidden by the overturned desk. There was a dark, reddish-brown stain on the floorboards, a very large one, and lying in the middle of it, glinting in the beam of my light, was a small, tarnished piece of metal. I recognized it instantly. It was identical to the one I'd found in the safe, a Hero of Socialist Labor Award. Volkov's medal. He hadn't left this place. My blood ran cold. This wasn't just a research facility. It was a tomb. Suddenly, a floorboard creaked upstairs. I froze, killing my flashlight, plunging the room into absolute darkness. My breath caught in my throat. I stood perfectly still, every muscle tensed, listening. It wasn't the sound of a settling building or the wind. It was a distinct, deliberate sound. A footstep, and then another. Someone or something was in the building with me. My heart hammered against my ribs so hard I was sure the sound was echoing in the cavernous room. I wasn't alone. The footsteps upstairs were slow, measured, with a heavy, rhythmic quality that sent a primal fear coiling in my gut. It was the sound of something pacing, waiting. I crouched behind the overturned desk, my crowbar gripped so tightly my knuckles were white. Who could possibly be here? A squatter? Another urban explorer? No. The feeling in this place was wrong. The barricaded doors, the frantic scratches on the wall, Volkov's medal lying in that dark stain. This wasn't a place people came to. It was a place they fled from. The pacing stopped. The silence that followed was somehow worse, thick with anticipation. I held my breath, straining to hear anything over the frantic drumming in my ears. A faint scraping sound came from directly above me. Then a soft thud. I risked a glance upwards. The ceiling was a patchwork of shadows and decaying plaster. Nothing. But the feeling of being watched, the same feeling from outside my garage, was now a suffocating certainty. It knew I was here. I had to get out. The answers didn't matter anymore. Survival did. I began to back away from the desk, moving with agonizing slowness towards the splintered doorway. Each tiny scrape of my boot on the debris-strewn floor sounded like a gunshot in the oppressive silence. I reached the hallway, my back pressed against the cold, damp wall. The main entrance was too far and barricaded. The window I came through was my only hope. I turned and began to move. A ghost in a building of ghosts, my flashlight still off. I was halfway down the corridor when a sound from behind me made me freeze. It was a voice. A woman's voice, raspy and low, as if it hadn't been used in a very long time. It wasn't speaking words, but humming a tune, a simple, haunting melody, like a lullaby. It was coming from the office I had just left. My blood turned to ice. It had been in there with me the entire time, hiding in the shadows, watching. Panic overrode reason. I broke into a desperate, clumsy run, my boots slipping on loose papers and shattered glass. The humming stopped, replaced by a scuttling, scraping sound that was impossibly fast. It was coming after me. I didn't dare look back. I reached the common room, the faint grey light of the broken window a beacon of hope. I scrambled towards it, my lungs burning, the sound getting closer, the scraping accompanied now by a low, guttural breathing. I threw myself towards the window, hooking my hands on the sill to pull myself up. As my feet left the floor, something grabbed my ankle. Its grip was like a vice, impossibly strong. I cried out, kicking frantically with my free leg. I twisted my head around and saw it. It was a woman, or what was left of one. She was gaunt, her skin stretched tight over her bones, pale and almost translucent in the dim light. Her hair was a long matted tangle of black. She wore the tattered remains of a simple dress or uniform. But it was her eyes that held me. They were the same dark, intense eyes from the photograph, but they were no longer alive with vitality. They were ancient, cold, and utterly devoid of anything I recognized as human. It was Elizaveta. She pulled, and I felt the bones in my ankle grind together. I slammed my heel into her face, but she didn't even flinch, her grip unwavering. She was pulling me back into the darkness. In a final, desperate act, I reached into my jacket, my fingers closing around the brittle envelope. I ripped it out and threw it onto the floor between us. "This is you," I screamed, my voice raw with terror. "Volkov, he tried to help you." For a single, heart-stopping moment, her pulling ceased. Her cold eyes flickered down to the envelope on the floor. The photograph had slipped partially out, her own young, vibrant face staring up from the grimy floorboards. A flicker of something crossed her features. Not recognition, exactly, but confusion. A glitch in the predatory machine. That moment was all I needed. I kicked again with all my strength, this time connecting with her temple. Her head snapped to the side, and her grip loosened for a fraction of a second. I tore my leg free and scrambled through the window, tumbling onto the damp earth outside, not caring about the cuts from the broken glass. I didn't stop to think. I just ran. I scrambled through the gap in the fence, the barbs tearing at my clothes and skin, and sprinted for my truck. I could hear a sound from the sanatorium behind me, a high-pitched, inhuman shriek of rage and loss that echoed through the silent forest. I fumbled the key into the ignition, my hands shaking so violently it took 3 tries. The engine roared to life, and I slammed the truck into reverse, not caring about the ruts or the branches scraping against the paint. I got onto the track and floored it, not looking back until the rusted iron gates of Facility 12 had disappeared behind a thick curtain of pines. I drove for an hour, fueled by pure adrenaline, before I finally pulled over to the side of the road, my body trembling uncontrollably. I finally understood. Volkov never got the chance to save her. He brought her to Facility 12, but it was too late. The change was too complete. The frantic scratching of her name on the wall, his medal in a pool of blood. He became her first victim in her new prison. She hadn't aged. She hadn't died. The anomalous cellular regeneration had trapped her in a state of eternal, predatory life, a ghost haunting her own tomb. The men in the gray suits had simply barricaded the doors and walked away, leaving their failed experiment to rot. And for 30 years she had been there, alone, waiting, the figure I saw outside my garage. It hadn't been her. It had been a warning, my paranoia manifesting. The real monster had been waiting right where it was left. When I got back to the city, I drove not to my apartment, but to the old industrial waterfront. I walked to the edge of a pier, the dark, oily water of the bay churning below. I took what was left of the tattered envelope, the letter, the report, the photograph of a smiling young nurse, and I let them go. I watched as the pieces were swallowed by the black water, taking their secrets with them. Volkov had tried to bury the truth, and in a way, I was finishing the job for him. The next day I sold the old Soviet safe for scrap. The metal dealer gave me a pittance for it, but I felt like I had been paid a fortune. As he loaded it onto his truck, I felt the immense weight of the last few days finally lift from my shoulders. It was over. I had stumbled into the last chapter of a forgotten tragedy and walked out alive. Life has mostly gone back to normal. I fix cars. I pay my bills. But something has changed. Sometimes late at night in the garage, when the only sound is the buzzing of the lights, I'll catch a scent on the air. Not of oil or metal, but of old antiseptic and damp concrete. And sometimes, when I look into the darkness at the end of the street, I still feel like I'm being watched. I know it's just my mind playing tricks on me. It has to be. But I also know that deep in the forest, 100 kilometers to the north, the Asylum of the Pines is still standing, and inside, a ghost with dark, familiar eyes is still waiting.